Embodied punctums in the domestic space, the meaning of antiquated objects in the home. For as long as I can remember, perhaps an aesthetic taste passed down from my mother, I have been struck by visual pieces that tell a conscious or unconscious narrative. My use of the word conscious in relation to seemingly mere objects is intentional here, as I think that things, be they mundane or extraordinary, are more closely related to people than they may at first appear. Marx touched upon this well in his discussion of the commodity fetish, in which he claimed that people, through the process of exchanging commodities, actually became things. This is especially relevant for the objects of interest for this essay. Namely, I am interested in exploring older, antiquated objects in the home, as well as the meaning of my attraction to them. Specifically, how do these objects generate meaning to the beholder through their visual components? And how can these meanings be understood? Starting with Marx is indeed a good place to begin. Many objects in a person's home, from the lavishly ornate to the functionally commonplace, tend to serve a utilitarian purpose. A table, for example, functions as a surface on which to serve food and bring people together. A living room chair seeks to cradle its user. But there is more going on beneath the surface than meets the eye of the unscrupulous observer. This mystical essence of the object abounds in metaphysical subtleties and theological niceties, arising not from its utilitarian purposes or use value, but from the social activity that has been inculcated into it. To further explore this social character of visual pieces, I am interested in exploring objects in the home, especially those that have extensive visual histories. Personally, I have never been fond of the new, in any regard. New things seem to be missing a soul or character that so palpably emanates from old and original forms. From a purely Marxist perspective, the social relations of labor are still imbued into new objects, so then what is missing if not this social character? Benjamin would say that the presence of the original is the prerequisite to the concept of authenticity, and further, that the authenticity of a thing is the essence of all that is transmissible from its beginning, ranging from its substantive duration to its testimony, to the history which it has experienced. Here, then, I turn to a different sort of social nature of things to which Benjamin alluded, one wrapped conspicuously in the passing of time. Antiques embody social relations that tend to arise from exchange, but this exchange or process of passing down usually takes place after the object has been created. Hence, when the object interacts with the person as a person, it does so not necessarily because it is embodied abstracted human labor, but because of its rather concrete human history. The object has been imbued with personal history, and as such, the personable. This personal history is important to the objects I've accrued in my home. Interestingly, however, I am not aware of what that contained personal history is, a reality that leaves a rich and worldly palette more like a blank slate for me to draw upon, simultaneously deriving from and creating its narrative. Here I would like to examine why I enjoy surrounding myself with items that embody a detached and elusive histories, and how they function in my home. Looking at the first object of exploration, an old, worn, and weary trunk that I know came from Ireland, but that came to me from a dear friend, we can begin to divulge this complex person-object relationship. Perhaps this trunk was carried overseas when thousands of Irish immigrants made their way to America. Or maybe it came later as a treasured object passed down through many generations. Regardless of its story, I do not know it. Instead, it sits in my living room as a focal point, serving as a coffee table that holds an assortment of books, magazines, and beverages. But as I mentioned earlier, it means more to me than just a mere holder of such accessories, and may even represent parts of my endogenous being, holding a deep inner meaning. In The Meaning of Things, Sixon Mahaly and Rochberg Halton interviewed several people about the objects in their home, and the types of meanings attributed to them. In looking at these objects as symbols and the home as a symbolic environment, the authors argued that some of these pieces could become carriers of repressed desires. The visual aspects of the trunk, not their function, its chipped and broken lock, Its battered surface, its often immovable and heavy body, suggest torturous and lengthy travels, adventures, and journeys. Accordingly, the trunk holds more than just scattered pieces of my living room, but is also a carrier of my desires for such experiences. Desires that, embodied in the trunk, will have to suffice temporarily. Next, there is an old and rare print by Alfonso Mucha from the early 20th century that hangs on the wall of my bedroom. Again, I find desire shrouded this time by a wooden frame. This piece, portraying a young Valkyrie swathed with flowing golden locks and adorned in an elaborate warrior-like headdress, radiates a natural feminine authority. I acquired this piece simply because it appealed to me aesthetically, but upon closer inspection, I realized its visual components speak to me beyond its nouveau beauty. She reflects back to me all the same mythical and often ephemeral nature of feminine power in modern society, but she also functions as a beacon that illuminates the possibility of attaining this power. Anthropologist Janet Hoskins touched upon a similar phenomenon in which people self-historicize with objects in order to create coherent identities. In this case, the surface beauty drew me in, and upon closer scrutiny, I found stronger elements by which to communicate notions of myself. Lastly, there is a set of intentionally empty frames that hang on the main wall in my living room. Many people that have come to my house have said that the emptiness looming inside of the frames makes them feel uncomfortable. For me, it is empowering. Like Barthes, who famously would not reveal the image of his mother, an act that made the idea of her image all the more compelling, this absence of images within these frames leaves powerful and open space for a story to be told. Indeed, perhaps this gives Benjamin's aura its ideal dwelling space, denigrated not by a production or a reproduction. It also, rather than dictates its interpretation, leaves a space for creative interpretation, the blank slate as aforementioned. In addition to not giving me a feeling of discomfort, the empty frames also symbolically hold the histories which they have experienced. Again, like Barthes, I cannot, or rather am incapable of, casting my gaze upon what those may even be. But like the trunk, who proudly flaunted his fatigued stature, the tattered edges of the frame suggest its experienced existence without the aid of images. Though these pieces were not created by me, nor did I bear their long histories, they are beginning to be representative of my own memory, bearing the marks of my own personal experiences, desires, and thoughts. Each piece is embodied by a pre-existing history that twists its way into my own reality. The punctum is the culmination of biography with autobiography, manifested by the visual form of the object, forming a meta-narrative of the object. Collapsing distinctions between being and becoming, historical identity is always a manifestation of this kind of temporal oscillation, writes Bachin, in regard to memory objects. Similarly, it is my role to create this identity, this inner punctum of the antiquated objects, marked by wearied edges, nouveau-esque beauty, or empty frames left for me to fill.